The heat was the first thing that stole 7-year-old Olido's breath. It wasn't the gentle warmth of the afternoon sun over the village of Umuokwago, it was a hungry, roaring beast that turned the air into a shimmering wall of gold and orange. She stood barefoot on the red dust of the compound, her small toes curling into the dirt as she watched her mother's provision shop, the small wooden structure with the hand-painted sign that smelled of laundry soap, dried fish, and hope, disappear into a cyclone of flames. The sound was like 1,000 dry branches snapping at once. My life. My sweat. Everything is gone, her mother, Nneka, shrieked. She was on her knees, her wrapper dragging in the soot, her hands clawing at the earth as if she could dig a hole deep enough to hide from the disaster. Neighbors had formed a frantic line, passing plastic buckets of water from the well, but the water hissed and vanished into steam before it even touched the wood. The shop was a skeleton of glowing ribs, and the village air was thick with the suffocating scent of burning plastic and charred dreams. The fire crackled violently, sending sparks into the sky like dying stars. Olido's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the flickering light. Her eyes scanned the chaos, searching for the one person who could make the world stop shaking. She looked for her father, Motsi Okafor. She expected to see him leading the charge, his strong arms swinging a heavy basin, his voice commanding the fight against the fire. But when she spotted him, he wasn't near the fire. He was standing at the far edge of the compound, near the path that led away from the village. He wasn't holding a bucket. He wasn't holding his wife. Instead, he was clutching a black plastic bag filled with his belongings, his Sunday shoes and the hidden cash box. His eyes were fixed on the horizon. He didn't look at the burning shop. He didn't look at Nneka, who was now prostrate in the dirt, wailing to the heavens. He didn't even look at Oloido. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, narrowed and cold. With a quick, decisive movement, he adjusted the bag over his shoulder and stepped into the tall elephant grass. One moment he was there, a silhouette against the dying light of their livelihood, and the next, he was gone, swallowed by the grey haze of the harmattan. Papa. Olido's voice was a fragile needle in the haystack of the fire's roar. Papa, where are you going? The only answer was the crash of the shop's roof as it finally gave way, sending a fountain of sparks toward the indifferent stars. Hours later, the fire had settled into a glowing, blackened heap of ash and twisted metal. The neighbors had returned to their homes, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the compound. She reached out and pulled Oloido toward her, gripping her shoulders tightly as if she could hold the world from falling apart. Listen to me, Ola, she whispered, her voice dry and heavy. Take a good look at that ash. That is what happens when money stops speaking. Oloido said nothing. She simply watched the ashes swirl around her feet as something cold and permanent formed inside her chest. Scene, Oloido sits in her apartment, staring at the Sterling Apex logo on her phone, planning her test. Oloido transfers money to test Ricardo's character, tension builds. Morning dawns, Oloido waits to see Ricardo's reaction to the declined card. Scene, Ricardo discovers the declined card and his face shows frustration and suspicion. Ricardo calls his associate, trying to mask anger, planning retaliation. Oloido monitors Ricardo's reaction discreetly from her car outside the building. Ricardo storms out of his office angrily, employees look shocked. Oloido's phone buzzes, confirmation that Ricardo attempted to use the card. Oloido plans her next move, a calm, determined expression as she thinks strategically. Oloido's subtle victorious smile as she watches Ricardo struggle from a distance, full circle closure. Oloido felt the air thicken as the waiter approached with the POS machine. The POS terminal beeped once. Declined. Silence fell, so thick it pressed against the walls. Ricardo's eyes flickered toward her, searching, cackling. Ricardo's fingers tightened around the card. The laughter of his friends faltered, replaced by the sound of their own surprise. The illusion of control that he had maintained for months crumbled in a single, elegant stroke. Oloido did not speak. Finally, Ricardo leaned back, his smile a brittle shell. He tried to laugh, but it cracked, exposing a man who had underestimated the very person. Ricardo finally pushed his chair back and stood, the gold card still in hand but powerless now. His friends murmured excuses, laughter dying before it could escape. The waiter stood frozen, unsure whether to retreat or remain, the machine still in his hand like evidence of a crime. Ricardo's voice rose again, sharper now, stripped of its usual charm. "Try it again," he snapped, his authority cracking. Ricardo's breathing grew heavier. The room was no longer his kingdom, it had become a courtroom. Every glance felt like judgment. Every whisper felt like accusation. Oloido finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her glass and took a sip of water, her eyes never leaving his. It was a simple action, but it carried the weight of power. She was no longer reacting, she was controlling the rhythm of the moment. And Ricardo knew it. "Maybe," she said softly, her voice cutting through the silence, "you should try your own card." The words landed like thunder wrapped in silk. There was no anger in her tone, only truth. And truth, in that moment, was the most dangerous thing in the room. Ricardo froze. For a second too long. That hesitation said everything. The room didn't need confirmation anymore, the truth had already revealed itself. The man who had lived like a king on borrowed wealth had nothing of his own to stand on. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. A quiet ripple of realization moved through the room. The image Ricardo had built began to crumble, piece by piece, under the weight of a single truth: he was never the man he claimed to be. Ricardo grabbed his jacket abruptly, his movements sharp and defensive. Without another word, he turned and walked away. No apology. No explanation. Just retreat. The same way Oloido's father had once disappeared into the night, only this time, she wasn't the one being left behind. Oloido exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body like a storm finally passing. She reached into her bag and placed her black card on the table. The waiter returned, silent and professional, and this time, the machine beeped differently. Approved. Oloido exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body like a storm finally passing. She reached into her bag and placed her black card on the table. The waiter returned, silent and professional, and this time, the machine beeped differently. Approved. She stood, smoothing her dress, her movements graceful and controlled. There was no need for anger. No need for revenge. The truth had done its work. And in that truth, she found something far greater than validation, she found freedom. As she stepped out into the Lagos night, the city lights stretched before her like a promise. The girl who once feared abandonment had become a woman who chose herself. And in choosing herself, she had rewritten the story entirely. The fire that once took everything had given her something greater, a vision, a strength, a purpose. And now, standing under the vast African sky, Oloido was no longer running from the past. She had become the future.